Good. So I'm really, really hoping that we're joined by a whole bunch of people online. So we're going to say hi to West, Ellen, Inverurie, Cafe Church here, Cafe Church at North, and maybe even Lifestyle tomorrow. So let's just give them a big cheer and a wave. There you go. And let's just hope that they are actually there. Before we get cracking, I just wanted to really briefly say that as leaders, we really want to be good stewards of everything that God is doing amongst us, and we want to make sure that we're being led by God's Spirit as we lead the church. And so there are two particular pieces of data that we really need. One of them is, what is Jesus saying to our church? And one of them is, what is Jesus doing amongst our church? And for both of those two things, we need your help. And so we've set up two email addresses. They're going to come up on the screen right now. And our invitation and encouragement would be, if you sense that Jesus is saying anything at all to us as a church, then please will you email that in, and that would be ever so helpful. And also, if Jesus has done something amazing in your life and you think, actually, yeah, that would be good, then, oh, no, please don't put that up yet. If you think Jesus is doing something amazing in your life, then we would find that so helpful to know. And so those two email addresses are what you need, words@catalyst.vin or mystory@catalyst.vin. And when you send that in, we'll be able to pray through whatever it is that God is doing. And let me just say, we reserve the right to tell you that you've sent enough emails now. And at the moment, we're not getting enough, but it may just be that you get carried away, in which case we'll tell you to stop. But until that point, please do email away. That'd be fantastic. I wonder if you remember your first day at school. Taryn says that I'm posh because on my first day at school, I wore short trousers and a tie. Put your hands up if you wore short trousers and a tie to your first day at school. Okay, put your hands up if you didn't wear short trousers and a tie. Maybe I am posh. Maybe that's okay. And also, I wonder whether you remember the first time you fell over in the playground, right? You fall over and you bust your knees. Your knees, when you're young, are just absolutely perfect, aren't they? Just the skin on your knees. And then suddenly, it's like blood everywhere. There's blood coming out of your knees. There's blood coming out of your elbows. There's blood coming out of your chin or something like that. And you're freaking out. And then you go and see the dinner lady or the school nurse, and she provides this. Let's have it now. Yeah, green paper towels. Green paper towels are like the reason for hope in the world, right? Suddenly, everything is going to be okay. And if it's really bad, if the situation is looking almost terminal, then the dinner lady will take the green paper towel and dip it in water, because that works so much better than it did before. That was all fine all the way through primary school, up until my final year, when there was a girl in my class. She was called Sarah, and she was much shorter than I was, and she stood up really quickly in the queue for lunch, and her head perfectly connected with my chin, and out came half a tooth. So of course I was just distressed, went to the dinner lady. She produces green paper towel dipped in water. I'm holding it on there for quite a while, taking it off. Tooth not grown back yet. Tooth still not grown back yet. And that was when I realized that all hope is gone from the world. Like, if there is such a problem in the world that can't be sorted or resolved with a green paper towel dipped in water, then there literally is no cause for hope in the world. And in all seriousness, I think throughout our childhood, many of us go through a journey of realizing that if we are just atoms and molecules floating around on a rock that is floating around amongst billions of other rocks in outer space, then really sometimes there is no cause for hope. Like, maybe some long dark tunnels will have no light at the end of them. Maybe some really difficult and painful situations can't be resolved by whatever I've got within me, by my own resources, by my own skill and wit. And that was definitely my story all the way through my teenage years, up until the time when I met Jesus. Jesus, who is more powerful than ever I dared to imagine, and kinder and more loving and more faithful than I ever dared to hope. And so for me, in so many ways, my connection with Jesus was a reintroduction to hope. And what we're going to look at this morning is a moment in the Gospels, which in so many ways is a dark and bleak moment. And even in that moment, Jesus introduces us to hope. So why don't we read together, or I'll read and you can listen, to Mark chapter 14. And we're going to start at verse 26. So what's just happened is that Jesus has taken them through the Passover meal and the Lord's, what we now call the Lord's Supper. And it's just at the very end of that, verse 26. It says, when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. You will all fall away, Jesus told them, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Peter declared, even if all fall away, I will not. Truly I tell you, Jesus answered, today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. But Peter insisted emphatically, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the others said the same. So what I'm hoping to demonstrate from this passage this morning is that even in the darkest moments of our lives, even when it feels like the walls are coming in and the roof's about to cave in, even in those moments, even in that place, if we know and love Jesus, then there is always hope. There's always a reason for hope. It's certainly one of the darkest moments in Mark's gospel. Judas has, we don't actually know from Mark's gospel, but we know from the others, Judas has presumably left the room, left the table by this point, and he's gone off to collude with the authorities and begin to work towards the crucifixion of Jesus. And now Jesus is breaking it to his remaining disciples that they have absolutely no reason to feel any sense of pride or self-confidence, because pretty soon, within a few minutes really, they're going to desert him too. It's a bleak moment. And it's sometimes in the shortest and seemingly most inconsequential verses in the New Testament that we learn so much. So for example, at this moment in John's gospel, at the moment when Judas leaves, John just says, and it was night. And he's saying way more than the time of day. He's saying this is a dark, horrible, bleak moment. It was night. And in lots of ways, Mark is doing the same kinds of things. So in verse 26, Mark really wants us to know, where is this conversation taking place? It's happening after Jesus has left the city of Jerusalem, and as he's walking up the Mount of Olives, he's telling them that they're going to betray him too. And what Mark is doing is pointing us back to a really, really bleak moment in the Old Testament, where Jesus' forefather, King David, was also horribly betrayed. So King David in 2 Samuel chapter 15 is betrayed by someone who's incredibly close to him. In fact, it's his son, Absalom. And Absalom he colludes with a bunch of other people, and together in this kind of unholy alliance, they sweep through the city of Jerusalem and they take over the city of Jerusalem. It's like the kingdom of darkness has enveloped God's city. And as he does that, King David walks out of the city of Jerusalem in bare feet and with his head covered. And they walk where? They walk up the Mount of Olives together, weeping and mourning, leading this kind of procession of tears. And Mark says, they sung a hymn and then they walked up the Mount of Olives. Mark is telling us that this is just a moment of, it's like as bleak as you can imagine. And even in this moment, there are 4 reasons that I can find for hope. And the first one is this: God's knowledge is infinite. His knowledge is infinite. Mark wants us to know that Jesus and our Father in heaven, they're not taken by surprise by anything that happens in this moment. And in fact, Jesus makes what I can count as 10 specific predictions about things that will take place over the coming minutes and hours. And every single one of those things takes place exactly as he's predicted. So let's just count them. He says, "You will all fall away. I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. After I have risen," it's a prediction that he's going to be raised from the dead, "I will go ahead of you to Galilee. Truly I tell you, today, yes, even tonight, before the cock crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. 10 specific predictions. It's so important that we grasp hold of this really, really important principle, that it doesn't matter what's happening in your life. It doesn't matter how bleak things appear. It doesn't matter how much the kingdom of darkness seems to be getting its way. It doesn't matter how much it feels like the walls are coming in and the ceiling's falling down. Even in that place, Jesus is not surprised by anything that's happening in your life. There was never a moment when our Father in heaven says to the angels surrounding him, "Well, I wasn't expecting that to happen." There's nothing that is happening in your life right now that the Father doesn't know. There is nothing that's happening in your life right now that he wasn't expecting. In the summer after I finished my GCSEs, my mum was out at work, and me and my friend David Levi decided to have a barbecue. And we didn't really know anything about how to light a barbecue, to be fair. But we pulled out this rusty barbecue from the shed, and then we looked around. We found some charcoal in the shed that had been there for the entire winter and was really cold and, more importantly, really damp. And we tried lots of creative ways of lighting this barbecue. And all it managed to do was kind of make the charcoal like a bit warm. That was pretty much as far as it went, until I noticed that there was a can of petrol belonging to the lawnmower in the shed. And so me and my friend David Levi divided up the labor. He said, "I'll pour on the petrol and you can light the match." And so that's what we did. So David Levi pours on the petrol. And at this point, looking back with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that kind of fairly warm charcoal did a really good job of vaporizing the petrol and turning it into a petrol cloud. And then I did a really good job of lighting the match, which ignited the thing into a fireball that came and hit me in the face. And I've been to enough first aid classes at Scouts and stuff like that to know that when you get a fireball hit you in the face, you need to get that into cold water as soon as possible. So I ran upstairs, I ran the bath, and I just sat with my face in the bath for as long as I could, cold water. And my brother and David Levi are looking at me, and they look really scared. Mainly because I've lost all of my eyebrows, my eyelashes, my hair, halfway back my head. It's really hard to imagine me bald, but that's pretty much what had happened. And it was really bad. And the following day, one side of my face started to blister. But my mum never found out. And the reason she never found out was because it only happened on one side of my face. And so I wore a baseball cap and dark glasses, and whenever I spoke to my mum, I just spoke to her like that. And it wasn't until my wedding day, when my best man told that as part of his speech, that she finally found out what happened, and she genuinely had no idea. The point is, isn't it amazing what you can hide from other people? But you can't hide anything from the Lord. He knows everything. And in fact, isn't that an incredibly motivating thing to know? That will help you to keep on the straight and narrow if wherever you are, even in the places where nobody else sees you, you know that God is watching your every move. I'll tell you what, that will keep you on the straight and narrow. But more importantly than that, what that also means is that whatever your circumstances, whatever your situation, even if it feels like you're utterly alone, the Lord sees your situation and he knows it. He knows everything about it. And even if nobody else knows that you've chosen to be faithful, even if nobody else knows that you've chosen to walk the narrow path that leads to life, even in that place, the Lord knows everything. He knows everything. The second hope or cause for hope that we can find in this passage is that God's love is unshakable. His love is unshakable. Taryn and I have a friend who we've known for about 20 years. And you know, when you associate certain things with certain people, what I associate with this particular friend is Cadbury's cream eggs. And when I think of her voice, I think about her saying, "Oh, I love a cream egg." Like, this is just kind of how it works. And you know, like, say you're in a petrol station and there's Cadbury's cream eggs by the side of the till. I always think of her in that moment. And I always think, oh, maybe I should get her a cream egg. So anyway, a few weeks ago, or maybe a couple of months ago, we're down south visiting family. And whilst we're there, I went into a petrol station and there was a pack of 3 Cadbury's cream eggs for £1. And I was like, you beauty, I know exactly what I'm going to do with that. I bought them, and then a few days later we saw her, and so I went to her and said, I've got something for you. I was so excited. I've got something for you. And she was like, oh, what is it? What is it? I said, look what I've got you, Cadbury's cream eggs. And she went, no, I'm not bothered about them anymore. It was like the whole earth just tilted on its axis slightly. It was like, what do you mean you're not bothered anymore? She said, yeah, they've changed the recipe. It's a different kind of chocolate, apparently. Wow. I know somebody else who was absolutely passionate about Iron Brew, and then they changed the recipe, and now she's like, not only is she not keen on it anymore, she's like, I hate Iron Brew now. Wow. And my point is, isn't it amazing how fickle love is, or what passes for love in our culture? I love cream eggs, not bothered. I love Iron Brew, hate Iron Brew. I love my wife. Yeah, that was kind of a season in my life. I love my husband. Found a new husband now. Isn't it amazing what passes for love in our culture? And yet God's love is the precise opposite of that. God's love is relentless. It's like a Niagara Falls of love just cascading down on your head. I love you, I love you, I still love you, I still love you. There is absolutely nothing that you could do to put even a dent into the amount of love that God has for you. So the disciples have finished the Passover meal with Jesus. And the Jews, whenever they take part in the Passover meal, even today, they sing a particular set of psalms. And in particular moments during the Passover meal, they sing particular psalms. Mostly they sing what they call the Hallel, which is Psalms 113 to 118. And it's actually amazing. I thoroughly recommend at some point just going away, reading those psalms, which really tell the story of the Exodus over and over again. And it's really amazing to think of Jesus and his disciples going through, singing those psalms on the way to the cross. But the very final song, the very final psalm that Jews still sing to this day is called the Great Hallel, and that is Psalm 136. And so almost certainly when in verse 26, this seemingly inconsequential verse, it says that when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. It's almost certain that the hymn that they sung, the final hymn of the Passover meal, Psalm 136. And in Psalm 136, 26 times, it says this: his love endures forever. It's a kind of a call and response song. And so you can imagine Jesus kind of singing the first line and then them just singing back to him, his love endures forever, his love endures forever, his love endures forever. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, his love endures forever. With a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, his love endures forever. He remembered us in our weakness, his love endures forever. He freed us from our enemies, his love endures forever. I love the thought of Jesus walking to the place of his betrayal, and ringing in his ears is the relentless love of God. As they're torturing him and whipping his back, in his ears. His love endures forever. When they're nailing his hands and his feet to the cross, his love endures forever. My point is, firstly, of the incredible comfort that Jesus must have known, reflecting on the infinite love of God his Father in moments when he felt utterly abandoned. And of course, we can learn that lesson too. That regardless of whatever our circumstances are, his love for us is utterly unchanged. But also, doesn't it shed a whole new light or kind of set the tone for what the whole Easter event is really all about? Ultimately, the whole Easter story really says to us that it's because of God's love that Jesus took himself to the cross. And what that tells us, and I don't know whether you're a Christian here today in here or in one of our other sites, but what it tells me is that he is pursuing us. The cross is an act of devotion. His love is unshakable. Third thing, God's power is unlimited. Do you notice the absolute certainty that Jesus says, verse 28? You'll all fall away. Pretty certain about that. But after I've risen, I'll go ahead of you to Galilee. Like, he knows that God is powerful enough to raise him from the dead. A friend of mine was really badly bullied at school, and it got to the point where he didn't feel able to go to school at all, and so he missed weeks and weeks of school. And eventually, his parents were like, we need to get this kid into school. What are we going to do? And they realized that they had some friends in Canada, some family friends, and so they sent him to Canada for a few months to just get him into a completely different situation and hopefully get him into school. And whilst he was there, he went to school and he was away from the bullies, but at the same time, some other things happened. The hormones kicked in, and he started developing hair in places, and then also, as well as that, more importantly, he started developing muscles. And so, actually, within a few months, he became pretty ripped or shredded or whatever the word is. And then he goes back home, back to England, and whilst, the first day at school, he arrives at the school and he goes straight up to the biggest bully. Don't recommend this as a strategy for dealing with bullying, but he goes straight up to the biggest bully and he just smacks him in the face and he goes straight down like that. All the other bullies disappeared. My point is, when you deal with death, what else have we got to be afraid of? I mean, really. If even death itself has been swallowed up in victory, we have nothing to be afraid of. I was listening to a debate on a podcast between some kind of professor of philosophy from a university in Florida and John Lennox, who's the professor of mathematics, or one of the professors of mathematics at Oxford University. And whilst they're talking, this guy from Florida is like, yeah, well, the thing is that, it's a nice idea that Jesus has been raised from the dead, but it doesn't really matter whether or not he was physically raised from the dead, because it's a kind of metaphor for how we can all be, in a sense. We can all have a new life if we really want it, or something like that. And John Lennox just absolutely ripped this guy to shreds. And he said this: It is a physical resurrection, and its significance is vast. All of us are faced with physical death. All of us are faced with physical death. If the problem of physical death has actually been solved historically, I want to know about it. And it seems to me that he's absolutely right. If God's power is so great that even the sting of death has disappeared, there is always hope. There is always hope. And the last thing is this: God's grace is never ending. Simon Ponsonby, who I consider to be one of the best Bible teachers in the world, strongly recommend his podcasts, tells this story about a moment when he was speaking at a conference of 600 vicars. I don't know what the collective noun is for a group of vicars, but there's a lot of vicars in the room. And during a break in between sessions, he goes to the toilet, and this might get a little bit gross for a while, but whilst he's just adjusting himself after he's been to the toilet, and his signet ring just plops into the bowl. He's looking into the bowl. He's like, oh no. He's thinking, I could claim on the insurance. I could just flush it away and then claim on the insurance. But my dad gave me that ring. It's precious to me. And so he's just standing there for a while, flush it away, get rid of it, reach in there, pick it up. And eventually that's what he does. And so he rolls up his sleeves, he puts his hand into the bowl, he has to fish around a bit. Eventually he pulls out this ring and he washes it, and he washes his hands relentlessly for about an hour, feeling slightly dirty. But the point is, that is what Jesus does with us. He could just flush us away, get rid of us. But instead he chooses to reach into our lives and to pull us out and to clean us up and to put us back to purpose. It's just actually astonishing when you think about it, that Jesus is there walking up the Mount of Olives with 11 of his disciples. And he says, yeah, you're all going to fall away. You're all going to betray me. I'll see you in Galilee. After your treason, I'll see you in Galilee. After the moment of your greatest shame, I'll see you in Galilee. And then we'll start to talk about making disciples of all nations. It's astonishing. The grace and the kindness of Jesus. He doesn't get rid of us, he takes hold of us. He cleans us up and then he sends us out. Do you see what I mean? Even in the moment of the darkest, even in the darkest moment almost of the entire gospel, there's still a reason for hope. And I was thinking about finishing this talk by a natty little phrase that makes really great sense written down, which is, no Jesus, no hope. No Jesus, no hope. It doesn't really work, does it? So let's finish it like this instead. I was reading the other day in Matthew chapter 13 where Jesus tells this tiny little parable. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, and when a man found it, he went and sold all he had to buy the field. And if Jesus really is the source of all of our hope, why wouldn't we give him everything? Let's not be the kind of people who have Jesus on the periphery of our lives. Let's not give him a tiny part of our hearts. And that is a temptation, is it? Come to church every week, just kind of be kind of nominally a Christian. But if Jesus really is the source of all of our hope, why wouldn't we surrender our entire lives to him? Why don't we stand?